Today I'm joined by David Halperin. He's an author and a scholar who studies Jewish mysticism, but he's also written books about UFOs. Now, I've had David on before, so this is our second talk. Let me just talk a little bit about his previous works. So he's the author of Journal of a UFO Investigator, a novel, Sabbatai Zevi, Testimonies to a Fallen Messiah, Seeking Ezekiel, Text and Psychology, Intimate Alien, The Hidden Story of the UFO, and more recently, he's finished another book, The October Man, for which I think is seeking a publishing agent. Is that correct, David?
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about The October Man?
Okay, it's rooted in my own experience from 50 years back that I was a graduate student writing my PhD dissertation, and I'd gone to Israel as a visiting research student at the Hebrew University, living in a research institute that was in the Arab part of Jerusalem. So I had kind of a dual experience being living in an Arab neighborhood and with the Arabs who worked at the institute and commuting every day to the university in the Jewish part of the city. And I had been there for about 2 months when the Yom Kippur War broke out, which was 50 years almost to the day before October 7th. It was actually October 6th, 1973. And for the first time, I felt what it was like to be in a country at war and struggling for its survival. And that experience pretty much changed my life, pretty much changed my thinking. And from time to time over the past 50 years, I've tried to capture that experience through the medium of fiction. And The October Man is the fruit of those efforts.
So would you say that the Yom Kippur War in some way led to the further uglification of the conflict? I mean, it was already kind of nasty, but it seems like it took on a really nasty character at some point that we're now dealing with, I guess.
Well, I'm not sure how I'd answer that. That at first it seemed utterly catastrophic. That was when, for the first time, the Arab states used the oil weapon against Israel. That is to say, to embargo their oil on any country that would support Israel. And you thus had a chorus of denunciations of Israel by countries that were clearly acting out of the fear of being starved of what had become their essential essential source of fuel. So things looked very grim back then, and I try to remember that now when things also look very grim. And to think, was it as bad then, or did it feel as bad then as it does now? And I think it did. And yet, some good things came out of it. That in November 1977, a little over 4 years after the war broke out, Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, which had attacked it, was one of the two countries that had attacked Israel, on Yom Kippur 1973, announced that he was coming to Israel to address the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and to offer peace, which was just an incredible transformation for the better. Since then, the conflict has shifted so much that it's kind of hard to remember what it was about back then. We think of it now as Israel versus the Palestinians. But back in 1973, it was Israel versus the Arab world. The Palestinians were only a small part of it. And the bitterness between Israelis and the Palestinians living under their rule, it was there, but nothing like the intensity it became over the following decades. So I don't know if would you say that the Yom Kippur War made the conflict uglier? I don't think so, but it was the beginning of the process that that transformed the conflict between a conflict among states to a conflict between two peoples, one ruling over the other.
Well, I mean, some critics have said that what Hamas did cannot be rooted in any terrestrial concern, that it's so transcendentally violent that it doesn't make sense to try to root it in terms of a quest for land or justice, that it's something beyond that, motivated by religious fervor. But would you agree with that?
I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, I think, okay, I'm probably going to get into really treacherous ground here, and probably some of your viewers may get very indignant about what I'm about to say. That I don't think the Israeli position on the Palestinians is that they're unworthy human beings. We have to suppose that they are human beings who act in accord with completely intelligible human motives. The position would seem to me more that they are dangerous neighbors, which became clear on October 7th. To say that we could understand why they were dangerous neighbors, why they did what they did as human beings. Yeah, the question is, what follows from that?
So does anybody know what follows from that? Has anybody's commentary kind of struck you as, that's as being on point?
I think lots of them do, and they don't always agree with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't claim any special expertise on this. I am horrified by it. I wish desperately that it were not happening. I have felt myself under a dark cloud since October 7th, but I don't claim to any particular understanding of it.
In terms of attitudes towards Israel, in the wake of the Hamas attack and Israel's response, has this exposed increased anti-Semitic sentiment, or do you think that the responses to Israel have been proportional?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, what is striking is how vehement the attacks on Israel became immediately after October 7th, before the humanitarian catastrophe that's engulfed Gaza had really gotten going. I mean, the Harvard students had to jump in and say that the people who actually did the killing are absolutely absolved from responsibility for it. I mean, which is a pretty grotesque assertion. And I it's very hard for me to think that the intensity, the suddenness of the condemnation of Israel in certain circles, and particularly the very early currency of the claim that Israel was committing genocide, which seems to me absolutely false, and to have, in my opinion, a strong anti-Semitic subtext, that suggests to me that there is something more going on here than simple sympathy with people who have, let us acknowledge it, have suffered terribly and who deserve sympathy.
But what then, if there is an anti-Semitic undercurrent, then what is the reason for that? Is it just like a repetition of the old cycle of anti-Semitism that we've seen throughout history, or is it something new under the sun? Because it also seems to be coming from the left as much as the right, if I'm reading the situation correctly.
Yeah, but that was also the case even 50 years ago,
Okay.
that there was a fair amount of what I thought was quite unjustified hostility to Israel from the left. And the historians of anti-Semitism say that that left-wing anti-Semitism has a long pedigree, including Karl Marx himself, who, although of Jewish ancestry, was very bitterly critical of Jews and Judaism.
Do you think that there's any prospect for Jewish mysticism to intersect with Islamic mysticism to sort of facilitate peace in the Middle East? Are there any projects like that?
It would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Listen, there was a rabbi at one of the West Bank settlements, Tekoa. His name was Menachem Froman. And you could write him off as a right-wing religious zealot, which he kind of was, except that he was an unabashed admirer of Islam. And he was convinced that any attempt to make peace, as long as it was between secular elites in Israel and in the Muslim world, was going to get nowhere. And that what really needed to be done was a joining of two religions that he felt had an enormous amount in common, with the exception, he said, that the Jews had forgotten to serve God with the appropriate emotion. And our Muslim brethren, as he said, have kept that joy, the joy of the zikr, the really the Sufi form of ecstatic mysticism that connects you with the divinity, that we need to learn from our Muslim brethren how to serve God with the joy of the zikr. And he tried to carry that message that in 1999, before the Oslo Accords broke down, he went to Gaza to carry that message to Muslims there. And I mean that he did participate in it, was welcomed to a zikr, and did dance, with this was his dream, did dance with the Muslims, chanting the name of Allah over and over. Now, if the spirit of that zikr could have spread then who knows what might have happened. But it didn't, and a secular person might say it couldn't have. A secular person might say this was all a fantasy of Froman's. I don't know. I mean, I wrote a blog post on that several years ago, in which I said that I quoted the what one of the Muslim leaders said to Froman on that occasion, and I said that in this there is a peace plan. The problem is that to carry it out, all parties have to really, really, really believe in God. And the Middle East problem may not be that it's too religious, but that it's not religious enough. I don't know. I'm not sure that I would stand by that last statement, but it does seem to me that there was a beauty in Froman's vision, which, if it was impossible, it's tragic that it was impossible.
And so, would you say that the Netanyahu government, in a way, was an inevitability or an aberration in Israel?
I don't think either one or the other. I mean, it was not an inevitability. The current, very, I would say, viciously right-wing government uh, won by just about, the narrowest of margins in 2022. Just if the parties further to the left had been willing to unite, it wouldn't have gotten into power at all. So I would not call it inevitable, and yet it's not an aberration either that the that it represented, at least at the time, the views of a large number of Israelis.
But would you say that the Netanyahu government has exacerbated the situation right now?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I don't see. Look, I don't know if Israel could do differently than to wage this war. I don't know if there was a really good alternative once October 7th had happened. But certainly October 7th did not have to happen. It was a failure of strategic intelligence that seems just incredible until you remember October 6th, 1973, when nobody guessed that Egypt and Syria were about to attack. And as you know, if you've been following the news, that Netanyahu, in the months before October 7th, was pursuing a very radical program of trying to strip the Israeli Supreme Court of its power and to take it in his own hands, which the security establishment warned him was going to leave Israel vulnerable. And he ignored the warnings.
And we might also think of the government as an example of another populist kind of right-wing nativist party, right? In kind of the mold of Trump or Orban in Hungary.
Yeah, I mean, that's at least the conventional wisdom, and it seems to me to make sense.
Are you aware of like many specifically Israeli interventions or involvements in ufology, apart from like Uri Geller, who did report a kind of contact experience, and the former chief of space defense Haim Eshed? Are there many other Israeli involvements in this topic?
Yeah, that
Maybe
is
overlaps with Kabbalah specifically.
yeah, I don't know about Kabbalah, but the overall question of Israeli involvement with UFOs is to me an incredibly fascinating one. And if I am spared, I'm 76 years old. Let's not ask for the moon. Let's ask for another 10 years. If I am spared for another 10 years, I would hope to spend at least some of those years investigating it. Because all I know, when I first visited Israel in 1964, UFOs were nothing. They were total. I mean, one Israeli said to me, "Oh, we don't have UFOs here. We're a practical people." And there actually wasn't even a word for UFO then. You had to call them salachot ma'ofafot, flying saucers, which sounds a lot sillier in Hebrew than it does in English. And at some point, probably in the 1980s, in the late 80s, the idea of UFOs began to infiltrate. And the 1990s were a golden age of UFOs in Israel, that people not only saw them, they saw their occupants. And I was going to postpone this point, but I better spit it out now before it gets lost, that the Israelis tended to see the UFO occupants as giants, which, as far as I know, is contrary to the UFO experience, not only in this country, but in most of the world. And that intrigues me. And it intrigues me for a number of reasons, one of which is that the conventional wisdom, and in this one, I'm going to go against the conventional wisdom, is that Israeli ufology is simply an American import. That the X-Files was an extremely popular show in Israel. I don't know how many of your listeners remember even the X-Files, but you know that show popularized a lot of the themes of the UFO movement. That in Hebrew it's called tikim ba'afela, files in darkness. And the conventional wisdom is that the Israeli involvement with UFOs was simply an American import. But if that's the case, why the giants? That suggests to me that there is something in the Israeli collective psyche. And here's where we get into the Jungian approach to UFOs, that we can speak of the collective psyche of a people or even of a species, that there's something distinctive about the Israeli one. And I don't know what that is. I should mention that I've been in touch with a very interesting gentleman named Yoni Shadmi, who is the UFO writer for Haaretz, which is one of Israel's leading dailies and the most liberal among them. And the very fact that Haaretz has a UFO writer who publishes interviews with Leslie in Hebrew with Leslie Kane and Louis Elizondo, and especially a very fine one with Jeff Kripal, which we may want to come back to. That fact seems to me a cultural datum of some importance. I would be curious to know if the more right-wing Israeli newspapers have anything comparable. And this is something I think you and I have exchanged emails about, that the conventional wisdom again is that there is something about UFOs that ties it to the political right, whereas my impression is that it's the center left in this country that has the most involvement with UFOs. And I think that may also be the case in Israel. But I do not know the situation there as well as I would like to.
So are we, you say giants, are we talking about just like fairly tall humanoids or like dinosaur?
Oh no, no, something like seven. I think 7 feet is the usual.
So that would be like
The,
Goliath, right? And it could that be the source? Like David and Goliath is like the
well,
subconscious.
yeah, yeah. The either or perhaps there's a pervasive tradition that the Aboriginal inhabitants of Palestine, of the surrounding areas, were races of giants. Deuteronomy speaks of what is it that Og, king of Bashan, was a giant, and if you doubt that, you can go to Rabat Amon, modern Amman, and you can look at his bed, which apparently has survived until the time of the author of Deuteronomy, and you know that only a supersized individual could sleep there. So yeah, I think there may be some connection. And this is part of a broader question that intrigues me of how our religious traditions resurface in the UFO guise. That I don't know if all of your viewers are aware that I do not believe in the physical existence of UFOs, but I believe they are a psychological phenomenon of great importance and not to be dismissed or to be belittled. And what's the word when you treat something as a disease? What's the word for it?
Pathologize?
Yeah, pathologized is the word I was looking for, or pathologized, but something that is an essential part of who we are as human beings.
Have you by any chance had a look at or read the recent Arrow historical review of the US government's intervention in the UFO topic?
I've looked through it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I know that people in the UFO community have criticized it for sloppy scholarship, and it does have a somewhat slapped together quality. But I mean, I would accept its essential claim that of that of all the stories that circulate about how some mysterious group within the government has gotten hold of crashed UFOs or something like that, that those are all just folklore,
Mm-hmm.
then that seems to me completely plausible. I mean, about a year ago, I think it was about a year ago, wasn't it, that David Grush
Yeah.
started making headlines with his claims that he was a whistleblower. He could reveal that we were holding on to alien spacecraft, and I mean, nothing at all came of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me. Do you know? I think Jack Brewer, the one who wrote "The Grays Have Been Framed," he sent out a tweet that I thought was rather neat. It was based on that song from the musical Annie. You know, the disclosure, disclosure. I love you, disclosure. You're always a day away, and that's the way it feels. That the disclosure is always just about to happen, but it never happens. So I think, however sloppy the scholarship of the AARO report may have been, I think their essential assertion will stand.
Yeah, I feel that as well. Um, and I mean, oh, you just reminded me of something else. Whether there are any leaked Israeli documents from the Mossad or the IDF or whatever part of the Israeli intelligence or security apparatus that talk about UFOs or US government involvement in UFOs. I mean, we don't find any leaked documents from any country actually, which speak of a actual reverse engineering program, for captured alien technology, and that would be a real piece of evidence, I think, but we don't find that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of anything in the Israeli context along those lines, and that to me is one of the key arguments against anyone who says that we've got all these amazing secrets about UFOs kept under wraps. Surely, with all the leaking of classified emails, documents, whatever, surely some oblique hint of UFOs should appear, and it doesn't. So, which does not make these stories unimportant. It just, and I mean, this is my, as you know, this is my position on all of ufology. It's not unimportant. It's very important, just important in a different way.
Yeah.
That that we need to take the stories of the crashed UFOs or the rumors about the suppression of them and analyze it the way we would any kind of folklore. Ask, what is it that creates itself, creates the 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 dis what would you say, the disposition to believe in it.
Now, I know that you haven't necessarily focused on UFOs for a while since we last spoke. Although you did have those interviews on risky.com, is it?
Yeah, risk.
Risk. They're very good, and I'll put the links to those in the description. But do you get any sense that people have started to revisit the Jungian idea more since we last spoke?
I have not, but I've not been in close enough touch to really to say definitively that they haven't.
And do you expect UFO beliefs to take on a more messianic vision in the coming years because of all the geopolitical ruptures that are taking place? Or do you at least expect UFO belief to increase?
I wish I knew. I I mean, one of the things that struck me in the AARO report is the remark that UFOs are impacting popular culture more now than they ever have in the past. And no evidence, the writers give no evidence for that. It's just their subjective impression. But I think it's a legitimate one. Certainly, there's a respectability to them. I mean, just a few weeks ago, the New York Times put on its website a link to some movie about some filmmaker reflecting on Roswell and what it means. I thought the movie was actually kind of silly, but the the fact that the Times would do that to me is important. But what may happen with this in the coming years, I don't know. I mean, everything just I mean, everything seems so much up for grabs in this year. I mean, we don't have the slightest idea what the leadership of this country is going to look like after November.
Any other thoughts on this topic?
Well, I would encourage your listeners, should I speak of listeners or viewers? I'm not at all sure. So,
Oh, either one is
yeah,
equally correct.
yeah, okay. I would encourage your listeners slash viewers, if they don't check out anything else, to check out the second episode of Risk, in which a woman named a forensic scientist named Bella Clark talks about her childhood and adolescent experiences with UFOs. And I appear there as kind of a commentator. And what she describes an event witnessed by her brother, and a family friend when they're out fishing late one night in South Georgia, of a UFO that flies very low over them and then proceeds to entwine itself with her psychic life, particularly her relationship with her mother over the next several years. And I have to, I'm going to have to admit, I don't know what those three kids saw. I don't know what they experienced. But it is clear that Bella, at least, was not just somebody who happened to be there when a spaceship from Zeta Reticuli decided to fly over Georgia, but that her experience of that alien thing, that numinous thing, was a part of her, and that it was deeply woven in to her psychic life. I mean, the part of her story that I just sort of started laughing when she said it, was that her mother said to her, "Here's a book you ought to read," and handed her a copy of Whitley Strieber's Communion. And the reason I was laughing, I didn't get a chance to say it on the show, is there's almost something totally identical with Carrie Mullis's encounter with a UFO in the 1990s, a very strange experience of missing time, where that later he goes into a bookshop, he sees Communion on the shelves, he instantly buys it, goes home and starts reading it, which is a story many people tell. And then he gets a call from his daughter, who had an experience rather similar to his, and she says, "Dad, there's a book I want you to read. It's called Communion." As if there's something about this book that galvanizes people's sense of something beyond their normal senses.
Did Bella see a gray, or did she report another type of alien or being?
Well, she saw nothing. She saw no pilot at all. But she had dreams in which she was taken into a mist, and there were two aliens, one older and one younger, and the one older seemed to have some sort of wisdom as to what the whole experience was about. And I did write a blog post on that, in which I commented that much of her story reminds me of the Pascagoula abduction, and her older and younger alien mirrors the older and younger experiencer at Pascagoula.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it fills us with questions that I don't know the answer to, and I have to express perhaps a biased view that the questions that it raises are far more interesting than any extraterrestrial alien could be. That they're about, and this was what my book was about, the alien within us.
Was her story, I don't think it was really, I didn't get the sense that it was really centered around death, though, which is a theme that you explore.
No, not at all.
Right.
Not at all. It will that way it will not fit into my theory. But it does, as as I remarked in my blog post, not only suggests Pascagoula, but the granddaddy of UFO experiences, which is Ezekiel's vision by the river Kavar. And the river Kavar apparently actually existed. It was a canal in Babylonia. But the word Kavar in Hebrew means already, before that, as if Ezekiel had his experience by the river of before, the river of the, I would say, the primordial.
So instead of death, it's something to do with the origin.
Perhaps.
Yeah. And I've often wondered whether, well, I guess Jung had similar premonitions, but for him the flying saucer was itself kind of a symbol of unity, or I wonder if it could also be like a cycle because it's a circle.
Yeah.
Could that be? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's in some ways the neat thing about this kind of ufology, and also its great weakness,
Yeah.
that almost anything you suggest, yeah, yeah, it feels right.
Although Bella didn't report a flying saucer, she had a triangular
Yeah,
UFO. Yeah.
yeah.
Was this when was her sighting exactly? Was it hot on the heels of the Belgian wave?
No, it was she dated it. She didn't give an exact year, but she said early in the 2000s.
Okay, so a while after, yeah. Well, David, how does one say peace be unto you in Arabic and in Hebrew?
In Arabic, you say Assalam alaikum, and in Hebrew, you say it's almost exactly the same. Shalom aleichem.
Very poignant that they're almost the same.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I hope that there is justice and peace in Israel and Palestine. I'm sure you can join me in wishing everybody there security and justice.
yeah. We could all say Assalam alaikum and Shalom aleichem to everybody there. May it come speedily and soon.